Hello, class. Because next week we have our peer reviews for the first essay, the narrative, I thought it'd be appropriate to run through a sample peer review so you can see how it works and what you should be doing. So there are a couple things that you will need. The first thing is going to be the peer review checklist. This is what the checklist looks like. There are a number of questions that you will answer. The other thing that you'll need are 2 essays from your peers, and you'll be running through this checklist for each of those essays, and then you'll be returning it so that the student can see your notes. I'm going to run through this checklist on a sample essay from a previous class, and I'll kind of show you what you're looking for in each question. So let's begin. The first question that we have is locate the thesis, identify the topic and claim. The thesis should be the last sentence of the introduction. So let's take a look at our sample essay and see if that's true. If so, we can then identify that topic and claim. Here I have the student's essay. I look at the end of that introduction. We have this sentence here. Billy was leaving for his deployment and it terrified me, but at the same time, it made me feel proud to call him my boyfriend. So what we have here is a thesis. We're going to look at that topic and claim. The topic, of course, is going to be our 10-minute moment. This says Billy was leaving for deployment, so that is the moment. Now, it could be more specific towards that 10 minutes, but I do see a topic here. And then the opinion, it terrified me and made me proud. So I should see terror and pride running through this essay. Now we go back to the list. Number 2, does the thesis mention the 10-minute moment and make an opinion on that moment? As we've said, it could be more specific as to what 10-minute moment of leaving is this student actually writing about. Number 3, can this thesis stand alone or does it require information from the introduction to make sense? We go back to this thesis. Billy was leaving for his deployment and it terrified me. At the same time, it made me proud to call him my boyfriend. I would say that can stand on its own. It doesn't need anything else from the introduction for that sentence to make sense. What we want to avoid are any type of statements that say this or it, it has a pronoun that requires something previous in order for it to make sense. So this one does make sense on its own. Number 4, is the thesis at the end of the introduction? Yes, we do see it here. If you don't see it at the end of the introduction or that final sentence doesn't look like a thesis, you're going to need to find the thesis and then tell the student to move that to the end of the introduction. Number 5, we're going to read the introduction. The introduction should avoid philosophy, so we want to make sure we don't see statements like you or we. We want to look at whether the introduction starts with a scene, which is good, or essential background, which is also good. And then we want to look at how effective that introduction is. So let's go back to our essay. As Billy, his family, and I walked into the airport through the sliding glass doors, I was met with the sound of people everywhere. People rushing around to get their gates, people greeting their loved ones, excitedly laughing and cheering, and people with tears in their eyes saying goodbye. I knew as we walked through those glass doors that this would be the last time I would get to hold his hand in mine or even be in the same room as him for a long time. Billy was leaving for his deployment and it terrified me, but at the same time, it made me feel proud to call him my boyfriend. So we see by this opening introduction, it is actually a scene. We are in the airport. We see movement of people around us. They're laughing. People are saying goodbye. So we're right into the scene, which works very well. Now, number 6, reread the thesis and then the first body paragraph. Is the writer supporting the thesis with concrete details and sensory language? Again, I'm going to look at the thesis. Billy was leaving for his deployment and it terrified me, but at the same time, it made me feel proud to call him my boyfriend. I know I'm looking for fear, I'm looking for pride. So we look at this first paragraph, body paragraph. Billy and I started heading over to the checked baggage kiosk to get the tags for his bags. I tried to help him carry his bags, but they were too heavy for me to carry. He laughed as I tried to pick up the huge canvas-feeling green duffel bag. I asked, "What did you pack in here?" He looked at me, still laughing, and said, "Whatever the army gave me," and told me to put in there. His little brother Kurt came over and helped us carry the bags over. Billy scanned his boarding pass, and the kiosk printed out the tags for his bags. After attaching the sticker tags to his bags, we took them over to the scale. I stood there taking a moment to breathe. It hit me hard that he was leaving. I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest grew tight and I couldn't breathe. I knew he was, but before it didn't feel real. I stood there fighting back tears, which made my eyes burn and my head hurt from trying so hard to keep it together. So now I'm going to assess whether I see fear or pride here. I would say I see fear towards the end with the student having a hard time to breathe, but she doesn't really show much fear in the beginning of the paragraph. This is where action has overtaken the experience. And so we get a lot of what's happening, but I'm not seeing any fear. I'm not seeing any pride. So I would suggest that the student add more sensory details in this first half that shows that fear and pride. So number 7 asks, where could more sensory language be included? We discussed that. It looks like in the first part, especially of that paragraph, more sensory details are needed to show the fear or pride. And then where does the paragraph stray from the thesis? So it does stray from that thesis because we don't get fear or pride in the first half of the paragraph. So I'm going to do this for 2 more paragraphs. So I'm going to continue these steps 6 through 8 for 2 more body paragraphs at least. You can do the whole essay, but by the time we go through 3 body paragraphs, the writer should see some patterns or uh, some common errors or successes that have happened throughout those paragraphs. And they can apply this to the rest of the essay. Number 10, read the conclusion. Does the conclusion end with a scene that leaves the reader with a final feeling? Does the conclusion incorrectly explain the essay to the reader? So one thing we don't want for a conclusion, we don't want to say, reader, in case you're too dumb to get it, here's the point of my essay. Instead, it's better just to end with a scene that leaves the reader with a final feeling, and that will show the meaning of the essay. You'll notice as I go through these, I'm reading out loud. Reading out loud is a great way to catch any awkward wording, any sentence level errors, punctuation errors. So I highly encourage you to read out loud while going over these essays. Let's look at the conclusion. After we could no longer see him, we started heading back to the car. We took a different way to the car, taking the elevator. We pushed the white button on the little panel, hearing a ding as the elevator came up to the second floor. The shiny silver doors opened with a whooshing sound. We all stepped on, having the elevator to ourselves. The door closed with a crunchier noise than before. We stood there silent. The elevator was silent, but my brain was not. It was filled with thoughts. How hard will this be? Why is he leaving me? I can't wait to see him again. He has done such a good job navigating his way through this. The only sound was from the ding of the button being pushed and the noise from the elevator ascending. The ding brought me back to where I was. I watched the red numbers above the door count down, dinging with each other. On the last ding, the doors opened and we all stepped out, ready to search for the car. So this ends with a scene. We end with that elevator ride down. And I think we get some sense of feeling here. The feeling that I am getting is this quiet reflection on, what has happened and where is this going to go from here? How is this person going to move on without her boyfriend in her life for a while? Number 11, does the conclusion correlate with the introduction? I believe it does. We start with the scene in the airport. We end with the scene leaving the airport. So there's a nice tie-in there. Number 12, state what the writer has done well and something that needs work. So one thing that I see that the writer does well throughout is the writer includes a lot of quotes, exact words that were said, and a lot of thoughts. These help to paint the picture with that concrete language. But as far as the fear and the pride, that doesn't run through this entire essay. So I would suggest that the writer includes more sensory details with those quotes or thoughts. Instead of saying something like, I thought, how am I going to live without him? You can add a sensory detail to show that fear. I thought, how am I going to live without him? As I grabbed his hand and held on tightly, hoping that he wouldn't move closer towards the gate. Something like that could show the fear more than just the thought itself. So the writer does well in including concrete details like thoughts and exact words, but there could be a lot more sensory details to also show that fear and the pride that was promised in the thesis. Then number 13, discuss the grammar, punctuation, or other errors that made the reading difficult. I did notice some fragment sentences. I did notice some comma splices. I would suggest that the reader read the essay out loud to catch all of these sentence level errors. Once you have completed the peer review, you want to make sure that you write your responses. Here are my responses to this essay. I've just used that template and I put my responses in red. For example, I listed the thesis here. Doesn't mention 10-minute moment. I put the moment mentioned is not very specific. It does make a claim. We look at the paragraphs. I talk about the first body paragraph, the second body paragraph, and the third body paragraph. We look at the conclusion. I mentioned the conclusion is all action with no interiority to show pride or terror. So even though we end that conclusion with a scene, I would suggest maybe using an I instead of a we. So we get more of that pride or fear that was promised. And then we look at, I made a couple comments about reading out loud, found some fragments and comma splices. Just make these comments on each of the essays that you're reviewing, and you'll return those to the forum, where our peer review forum, and that will fulfill this assignment. A peer review is not only to help your classmates, but also to notice what they're doing right in the essay. And so you can see if you're doing the same thing right in your essay, or to see some of the mistakes that they're making, and then reevaluate your own to see if you're making the same mistakes. Let me know if you have any difficulties.